Buenos días de nuevo, soy Santiago Arranz
Good
y
morning again. This is Santiago Arranz, and it's a pleasure to introduce Fran Yañez
en HPE.
from HPE.
Fran, ¿qué tal estás?
Fran, how are you? Fine. How are you? Thanks very much for having me.
Para ti por tu presencia también.
Well, thank you for
Ingeniero
coming.
de telecomunicaciones por la Universidad
He's a telecommunications engineer from Madrid Polytechnic University with over 14 years in the technology sector.
presentación va a versar sobre
His presentation is on edge to cloud service. So, Fran,
el suelo está
as I said earlier, the floor is all yours. Thank you very much, Santiago. I'm part of the pre-sales team at Hewlett Packard Enterprise, and I'm going to give a presentation on the transformation of the sector from edge to cloud as service using the example of Hewlett Packard. You'll hear some background music. It's nothing strange. It'll just be there doing my presentation. And I wanted to say that apart from the presentation I'm going to give, we also have two workshops, one at 1 o'clock on infrastructure, which I highly recommend. It's going to be a very technical talk where we'll be talking about how to apply infrastructure as a code. This philosophy, taking it to production, we're going to present the characteristics, show practical examples of how it's been applied to major projects. And tomorrow at 1:30, my colleague Antonio Areces will be talking about something that's going to be closely related to something I'm going to touch upon today, how to give control to the as a service models, how to help comply with the regulations, cost controlling, security controls, everything that's needed to be able to apply the as a service models in the safest possible way. Having said this, in the presentation or in preparing the presentation, what I've seen is that most presentations on this sort of follow a certain structure. So I'm going to follow this structure more or less. So I'll start with a slide on percentages with just 4 or 6 or 8 figures. In this case, I chose 4 at random. And most deployments of applications, or half more or less, are new applications. The other are new applications that are being transformed. That many companies are going to go to hybrid IT environments. And as I was preparing the presentation, I thought, well, you already know this because these are surveys that are put to you. So there's nothing I can add. These percentages are true, they're there, but you are already aware of them. And then in presentations, there are usually some key messages that are usually pretty good. The cloud is an experience, it's a destiny that AI is going to help to deploy all these new environments. And it's compulsory to talk about COVID, digital transformation, and how it's speeded up, and data gravity, and how that means that the how it's going to affect the workloads in one place or another. That again is all true. But again, you already know that because you're experiencing it. And then we usually have a message that the next wave of digital transformation will be fueled by apps and data everywhere, which is also true. But since I'm not going to discover anything new if I say more about this, I've just decided to turn it around and tell you something that you may not know so much about. And that is what the journey for us has been as IT providers, especially the more traditional IT providers, how we've become very good at data centers, very good at infrastructure, very good at servers, networks, storage, surveys, software stacks, and how we've also transformed into a company where edge cloud and edge service are very relevant. And I think it's particularly interesting because all companies, in a certain way, to a greater or lesser degree, are becoming technology companies. And we can give a very good example of a technology company and how this new type of environment has been transformed. I hope that you'll like this presentation, and I hope that you'll stay with me till the end. What has made Hewlett Packard Enterprise become transformed to an edge service company? Well, the pushing forces are the ones we can find in any environment. The competition, in our case, the competition that appeared several years ago of the public networks, the emerging technologies, markets, they came from Asia and have pushed us to move very quickly. How technology has also evolved quickly. and in general, the evolution of any business. But the major transformational force that has pushed us from those environments where we felt comfortable to this new edge service paradigm has been the same force that is pushing you in your day to day. Our boss. This is Antonio Neri, our CEO, our proud CEO at our Hewlett Packard Enterprise. A couple of years ago, and a discovery that's also being held now, that is 2 years ago, he came out with a message that he'd already been pushing since 2017. And he said that in the next 3 years, HPE will be a service company. It will be a company oriented to providing consumer-driven services, and all its portfolio will be delivered to as a service. You can choose what you want and pay only for what you use. This message right now is a much more widely recognized message in the interest. In many others are also applying this, but the experience from the point of view of those who worked at Hewlett Packard Enterprise, imagine the impact that suddenly your boss tells you that in all the environments you're working in, where you're good, that is taking you to the market, that all that is going to be transformed in just 3 years. And in fact, it's been a much quicker transformation, and that we're going to change all that. As well as everything we do, we're going to focus and be mainly a service company, no longer an infrastructure company. We were very good at data centers. We were going to be a service company. The impact was tremendous. And as employees, we felt, wow, what a challenge. Is it possible? Is it true? Is it not true? And what I would like to say is how we became or turned from being a software company, a server company, to an edge to cloud as a service company. And this is what we announce on our website. If you go to the typical website on who we are, we declare ourselves to be an edge to cloud as a service company. And we're going to analyze this logo back to front. I'll talk about the company first, because I'm using our example, because obviously it's the one I know. It's my company, and we sponsor these cloud days, but it's applicable to many similar companies, and it's applicable to many companies that have undergone this transformation, technology companies. So although the example is ours and the names we're going to use are ours, you're going to find a very general pattern, a very obvious pattern that applies to all industry. So your mileage may vary. Well, some things may be different, but I think it's a fairly good example that can help you a great deal. The core of the presentation, one of the cores is cloud and as a service. And how do we approach the cloud environment from the beginning? Because when we start to see that the cloud, especially the public cloud, but the cloud models that were going to be predominant in the future, we all started to develop our plans. Everyone has a plan. And everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. A very wise person said this, a great thinker, Mike Tyson. If you follow boxing, well, if you don't follow boxing very closely, this is a good example. It's used very much in business environments, because Mike Tyson was asked, your rival has this plan, he's going to do this, he's going to do that, and he said, I don't care. After the first punch, that plan's going to change. He's going to realize how powerful I am. And in heavyweights, it's unusual to knock an opponent down with a single punch. But after a while, he falls. And in industry, we used to receiving many punches and changing a little by little. But this, as a service model, this cloud model, is more of a punch that changes the industry very, very quickly. So the circuit was to adapt very quickly, to try many things, many of which worked, but many didn't. We had to try a lot of things. We had to take a lot of things to the industry as a provider, offer many things, until we push the right button. And we're not even in a full transformation. We're still learning day by day. And I'm going to start with things that didn't work for us. And one of the first things we did was to offer public cloud. If you remember, 10, 15 years ago, everyone started to offer public cloud because there was a great fear of being left out. and the public cloud came along, and if the future was all public cloud, and if we weren't there from the beginning, we could be left out. So all companies, all IT providers, or a large percentage, started to offer our own public cloud offering. What did we find? That the critical mass was important. We couldn't give a generalized public cloud because we didn't have enough critical mass, and many of us stopped those offerings. We sold them to more niche providers, more local suppliers, more specific suppliers, or with more specific technologies that started to offer cloud just for storage or certain types of cloud. And the big suppliers were left, the big public clouds. Very few IT providers managed to stay in the public cloud. The critical mass was very, very important, and we learned this during the early stages. What else did we try that didn't work? Well, imagine the situation at the time. We had software, we had servers, network storage, we had services. We packaged all that in stacks that were supercharged, and we went to a message with a slide that you've probably seen millions of times. And especially at that time, this kind of slide was very fashionable. You want a car? Don't buy the parts and build it because I'll deliver the car to your door. And it'll be ready to use. And this was fine. It grew very quickly. It made it possible to deploy private clouds very quickly, but it was a very limited private cloud because, as I said, we first took our stacks, we packaged them, and our stacks were very limited in our view. A lot of automation companies were bought, orchestration companies. We put all that in a package and we delivered it to the market. It was too oriented specifically to the fast deployment of a private cloud. And a cloud is more than that. What a cloud provides is not driving a car, it's being taken somewhere. And that's the part that we didn't understand. And we weren't getting it right. We needed to understand the load more than the technical specifications. It was based a lot on the what, but not on the why. And it gave us a lot of knowledge. And one of the things we saw that didn't fit was that they were very close stacks. There was very little interoperability. And it was very different to what was on the public cloud. There hadn't really been migration. So the next step we took was to try to align the industry to open structures. I think we were the first company to offer an open stack distribution with support. And the idea was instead of having a closed stack, very much focus on what I have, I'm going to try to let my customers align with the whole sector. It was also very much oriented on the technology focus, and it had a very good growth. It's had a lot of traction in a lot of environments. In the telecommunications sector, for example, this type of initiatives continues to develop, but we still found certain problems. One of them was that many of the existing workloads didn't quite fit in with this new solution. And here we learned that any development that we offered had to bear in mind that very few customers were starting with a green field. The technology startups that access the public cloud had a clear advantage because they didn't have their own IT and couldn't develop very quickly. But the customers we had, the traditional IT suppliers, had to live with those loads. And there wasn't a clear migration plan from on-prem to the private cloud. And we were almost there, but it still wasn't exactly what we needed because the cloud environment is much more complex. And we also have to consider scalability. We have to consider the service. And we have to specifically consider the things that did work, the things that we tried over these years and that were successful and which are the ones that we promoted. And the main one, crowd economics, the pay-per-use orientation that you've asked for so much. Because when we focus on these cloud advantages, one of the things you were most interested in was paying only for what you were consuming and not using IT budget for future projects or for those that weren't being executed yet. being able to start a project, align the cost of that project with the results of that project. And that's what we started with Green Lake in 2017, 2016, and this did work very well. And you can imagine why. One of the great advantages of the public cloud was that I have an unlimited buffer where I can grow or shrink and only pay for use. And we use that same premise so that you could grow your load or reduce your load. And something that customers have asked a great deal in this type of environment is how you can apply cloud economies with premise which one of the things that the public cloud does is to share loads. And it's true, obviously, we don't share our infrastructure with other customers when you stop using it. But if we look at the big picture, public clouds have a buffer too, because all customers grow and shrink. And they're based on that big critical mass to efficiently calculate their buffer so that the total cost of their use infrastructure plus the buffer will be efficient for their customers. And we've done the same thing. We've had enough critical mass in our pay per use system to be able to provide a buffer for our customers and to make the use of that buffer efficient so that the total cost will be optimal for our customers. Obviously, growth or the buffer you can use in a public cloud is practically unlimited. But the loads we're putting on the hybrid clouds are prepared to provide reasonable growth. VDI, for example, it's unusual to suddenly have 1,000 new users of VDI and you need 1,000 new desks overnight. And this type of environment and focusing on VDI because of COVID, you have to have contingency users that come in suddenly that have to work at home and have to have their desks, users that are mobile that suddenly need a desk that switches on and off. For that type of environment, a highly controlled local buffer is more than enough. And what else has worked very well? Adapting the solutions to workloads. Because from the beginning, one of the things we found is that when we deployed clouds on premise that were to become hybrid, there's a big difference between the public cloud and the private cloud. The public cloud accepts what's underneath as a workload pools. There's a pool and I consume it. And there's a concept that the prem also needs to have a single workload pool, and that isn't actually the case. You can have a private cloud with a prem that's a general purpose cloud and a generic pool, but you can also align those very specific workloads that required clouds with very specific stacks and offer it as a service. The secret here came from one of our leaders, the manager of the Green Lake office, who came to Zurich and said that one of the major growths was when they started to align with the market and to offer third-party workloads and to integrate that. And that's worked for us, looking for very simple solutions for very specific workloads. The world is hybrid, that's obvious, and those clouds will end up being hybrid clouds. And something that's worked for us too has been looking for efficiency in hybridization from the beginning. And this is somewhat unnatural, as we'll see later on. In a few years, so we won't be even talking about hybrid ID or hybrid clouds or hybrid computation. We just talk about computation or IT. This will be the way of hybridization. There won't be cloud computing, there'll just be computing, regardless of where those loads are physically executed. Another aspect, everything as a service, is not just the cloud environment, but this has meant that we've had to greatly modify our offer and our approach to the market. The cloud models spread as a service. This means that we can offer any workload, not just applications, anything that can be managed. And later on, we'll see a little example of this. And when we talk about managed, it's jointly managed with you. You tell us to what extent you want us to manage those loads. And we've also seen this because we started with loads where we wanted to start too high, and customers often wanted to have a lower level of control. So it's very important to be aligned and to find or to offer things that are aligned with the specific needs of each workload. These offers as a service have to be independent of the location. It would be a mistake to think about as a service on cloud, on-prem, on edge. It has to be across all clouds. You have to have the same management model on all clouds. You have to have the same cost model on all clouds, something we've also learned by trial and error. And one of the most interesting things in these as a service models is that it has democratized IT. As I said earlier, that public clouds made it possible for startups to use technology when they still didn't have enough critical mass to be able to have a data center and allow them to grow very quickly. As a service models are taking this to all environments. Let's imagine a company, any company that right now is starting to develop edge technology and doesn't have the critical mass to directly develop an edge, and they prefer to hire it as a service, or the private cloud concept or hybrid cloud concept is in itself. It's much easier, it's much economical to consider it a service and do away with all the difficulties underneath. And this means that very small companies can compete with very large companies. There are startups that are focused on their economic model because they just consume all their technology. And for us as a supplier, this is a headache because what we started as a year ago as ES or SaaS or PaaS ends up being everything, everything as a service. And offering everything is complex. It's very complex for us. It's very costly. We've had to develop very modular concepts, block concepts that enable us to integrate with the workloads you're asking for. It may be computation, pure infrastructure, just networks, just data, or storage, or virtual machines. What all suppliers would like, suppliers in any kind of cloud environment or as a service environment, we would like you to buy the highest level extraction, the transaction as a service, to buy the application as a service, because this is where we can provide more added value and where we can take a bigger piece of the pie. But in practice, each workload at each customer is different, and we've had to adapt. We've had to adapt by re-engineering our proposal to be extremely modular. This isn't easy. This is something that requires a lot of preparation and a lot of prior steps. The last point, which is closely related to all this, is edge. Edge is interesting in particular because many of the learnings we've had in the cloud concept comes from the distributed environments we had in edge. Edge or intelligent edge is defined as anything that is neither public or prem. Well, more strictly speaking, it's any environment where data is created, processed, analyzed, or stored, where something is done with data from our company and is not a core data center or public cloud. Edge has always existed.
El primer edge se podía considerar los terminales que se conectaban a los mainframe inicialmente. Bueno, eso abierto a discusión, ¿no? Pero el edge siempre ha existido. Y
there's an open discussion on this, and the interesting thing on LEDs is how things are evolving and how the LEDs are being used more. Well, half the loads are going to be run directly on edge. So just imagine what kind of impact that has for a company that was traditionally working with a data center, because all of a sudden this thing that is called edge could account for 50% of what you have or what you don't have if you're not capable of adapting sufficiently quickly. And this edge is also becoming mobile. And in the case of Santander, our host for this seminar, the edge of Santander, well, it would be a mobile phone, and each user has their own mobile banking office. That's where we generate data by interacting with the apps of Santander. And there we store data And this forms part of Edge, and it's becoming more and more mobile, and more complex, and more massive. It's growing a lot in importance, and 5G technologies are also going to produce a revolution. And it's also growing in the number of technologies that can be applied to that edge. The telephone is a wonderful example because of its computational capacities, but without going to something as extreme as a telephone, we can imagine that a typical data center server of 3 or 4 years ago had 16 cores and half a gig of RAM. In 2 or 3 years. It won't be risky to say that they will have 100 cores or 200 cores and several teras of RAM, and that in only one server we'll be able to run what we ran at a cluster in a data center. So in a small edge cluster, I'm going to have the same capability that I required for what I needed before, that is a data center. And this is enormous exponential growth for these workloads that are enabled by technology. And this is also conducive to new case users, and or user cases. And well, this is something you can see in this kind of computing applications. But what have we learned from Edge that can be applied to any cloud environment? Well, in our particular case, we learned many different things with a company that we have, and it's one of our companies that is called Aruba. And they had these radio frequency locating devices at shopping centers, but this is always an IoT environment. It's an edge environment that is massively distributed. So when you have something that is massive, you need mass management, scaled management. In other words, you have to deploy new IT scaled models, which is something that's very similar to what we need when we have environments based on microservices that are distributed in a multiple cloud strategy with a public and a private cloud, and also Edge itself. And it's the concept of fleet management. And this was very handy. Well, this knowledge was very useful because we knew a company that was already working natively with Edge. And it also allowed us to understand how these apps had to be resilient, because it's something very similar to what happens when we have these Edge distributed environments. And I can't plan what's going to happen when a components fails. What happens when an edge environment fails, or when an edge device fails? And what about when a cloud device fails? I can't send a technical expert whenever I want to do an update in my God knows how many thousands of shops or branches or telephone users. So how can I manage, or how can I monitor, how can I design resilient applications? Well, this knowledge that we had before is very useful. But at the end of the day, this is a service that covers everything. So this edge knowledge has to be applied to the entire cloud model, end to end, from the edge to the cloud. And one of the most interesting things has to do with security, because traditional security was based on the physical location. And whatever was in my firewall was secure. If there are any security experts, you're going to crucify me. But if you want, you can crucify me during the workshop, and I will be available so that you can kill me. But in any case, I'm being somewhat extreme. But what was in the firewall was secure. All security was based on a physical location. If a financial person was connected to a financial port, he was considered financial and had access to those services. If you, as a worker of a company, were connected to the guest Wi-Fi, you had access to the guest area, even if it was you and you were working for that company. So it doesn't make any difference. Who you were depended on where you were connected physically. And this has to change, of course, because the edge environments, and you can apply this knowledge to edge to cloud environments and multi-cloud environments, where applications jump between different environments, different clouds, and even between different countries where my clouds are present. But what we apply is a zero trust concept. And this is related to the fact that we're not only trying to obtain security where the user or the consumer is, the consumer of IT, but we need to know who that person is and how they're connecting. So the first thing we have to do is, well, associate identities to the devices, to the apps, to the users. We need to know we need you to tell us who you are, what application you're using, where you're connecting from, what it is you're doing. So all the information that you can include to give an identity to that app, to that transaction, or to that user. I'm going to give you an example of a person who's, I don't know, a risk analysis manager, for instance, and this forms part of the security frame. But if you're connecting from a mobile phone or from your laptop with your if you're connecting physically, but if you're in an unknown network, all of this has to be added on to the system. And this can also be applied to cloud applications if they're being run in one place or another. And these are applications that are being run in a controlled manner, in safe environment, or they are triggers that were completely unexpected. And what I do is provide access when I'm only sure that I know that it's going to work, and because we're going to have extreme monitoring. So if there's any divergence in relation to the expected behavior, I can do something about that situation and not have to remove an entire user segment, but only those users I believe are going to be problematic. And as I say, this has been very handy for many things we've seen in the industry, and we've applied this to the purchase of SPIFFY, or the Secure Production Identity Framework. But many times, knowledge is based on acquisition, of getting out your wallet and buying people that know about this. And what we have tried to do is find this end-to-end security from edge all the way to the public cloud, going through the data center in all aspects. And many of the cyber attacks we've seen are generated because what reaches the data center are non-secure sites, which is not the same thing that has been sent out from the factory. So security starts in the most physical layer of the supply chain, in the initial layer, and of how we can make sure that the physical system that I've manufactured is the physical system that is being installed in the correct site, or through specific certificates, or through passwords that we generate in the factory so that you can check the status of the hardware. Then we have the operating system, the driver, and the feeder. Whenever a machine is connected, you have to check everything so that when an app is run, and that app can say, I'm in an environment that I consider to be secure because all of the parameters that I have are correct. And that's when I can start to work. Then we have edge to cloud, which starts off at the edge and then goes back to the edge. As I say, the future models that we will possibly have are those in which the public and the private cloud will be hybrid, and they will also include the edge devices. You can see this in AI. And for instance, lots of intellectual property is being developed. A short time ago, we announced a sworn learning concept, where this learning of AI models was run directly on the edge devices, but we can go beyond that, and we can use a part of the computation of the edge computing I have to run loads when they're not being used for something else. Let's think about lots of offices or branches that are closed at night, and load goes from the public and private clouds to these environments so that they can be used. And the environment is like a big pool. And then we have the most beautiful example of this can be found in the space-borne computer 2 that we sent this to the International Space Shuttle. And for the second time, well, there was a first space-borne project, but these are normal cloud servers, which are running a specific Azure system, which is called Azure Space, and they're running hybrid cloud loads where most of the data that can be run, that can be analyzed, taken to the International Space Shuttle, because this is one of the extreme environments where sending data to my data center on Earth is very expensive and very complex. And this is a beautiful project, and I would like you to encourage to look it up on the internet. And we hope that these machines will be in operation for at least 3 years. And what is being run right now are data offered by the different instruments and satellites, and even pilot projects and experiments related to health and the health condition of crew members, and even DNA sequencing. So that means that this could be applied to future moon visits and even Mars visits. So it's cloud computing to the remotest edge, but it's a standard procedure that wants to establish this end-to-end vision of the edge to cloud environments. And with this, I'm going to finish. And as I mentioned previously, I think that the orientation that I've given this is interesting because all companies are becoming technological firms, and the example of how we have had to transform ourselves in a very quick manner, and how we've tested many things that haven't worked and things that have worked, where we've obtained knowledge on environments that we have acquired, which I think could also be relevant for you people, so that you can understand our evolution in this industry and your evolution. And you've also seen the story that lies behind Logo and behind Hewlett Packard Enterprise. Don't forget to attend the workshops. I'll be there. Should you have any questions or should you have any doubts, I hope that this has been an interesting presentation. And if you want to get in touch with me, just send me an email and I'll be more than willing to answer. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Frank. That was an excellent presentation, as usual. And what you said about the space mission is very interesting. So we've gone not only to the cloud, but beyond the cloud too. But anyway, thank you very much. And it's been wonderful having you here today. Well, thank you. Let's only hope that you have an excellent day and that you will enjoy the rest of the presentations. Thank you.